Welcome to another edition of the Willie Bragg Show. I'm your host, Willie Bragg, and we have back here again Dwight Welch. How are you doing, Dwight? Dwight, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. I work at a campus ministry, so college has started. Classes are in session. I just got done with the philosophy class that I teach and meeting with the professor. So fall is here. It's a good
Oh,
time.
okay. All right. I'm glad to see you here. I think that my audience will recognize you, but I've actually had a surge of new subscribers in the last few days. It, if you consider 1,000 videos viral, I had a video that went kind of viral the other day, so we had about 20 new subscribers. So you might want to introduce yourself once again to everyone.
Okay. So my name is Dwight Welch. I am a United Church of Christ ordained minister, and I work as a campus minister at United Campus Ministry at Montana State University Billings. I also teach part-time in the philosophy department, but you and I go way back, so to the 1990s, to another era, another political world in reality.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I think we might have first met. If we didn't meet we definitely met in '99 at the Socialist Party convention in Newark. I don't know if we met in '97 in Milwaukee at all.
No, we didn't. But I know where we first started communicating with each other. We were both members of Red Youth, which was the listserv. And for those who are too young to remember what a listserv is, it's an internet discussion group that kind of predated social media in some ways. Red Youth was the internet discussion group for the Young People's Socialist League. Yes, we were in our 20s once, right, Dwight?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I joined the Socialist Party. Actually, I was 18 when I joined, and also I joined DSA at the same time. Because I got a letter from Ed Asner. Actually, it's so funny. The reason is I got a letter from Ed Asner, fundraising letter, right? And the other thing was that I saw an ad in the Progressive magazine by Buskey. Can't think of his first name.
Don Buskey.
I was going to say, yeah, Don Buskey. And so joined the Socialist Party. But since then, I've been doing campus ministry work. And out in Montana and a lot of red states. I worked in Kansas and Southern Illinois, and found my way back to where I grew up, which is here in Montana. So,
what's interesting about you belong to a denomination that goes back to the Puritans, but it is one of the most progressive, liberal, mainline Protestant denominations in the United States today.
Yes. It's interesting because we have two in a way. So the Congregationalists and the Puritans, the Congregationalists and the Unitarians have common ancestry. We were all in the same church, and then there was a big church split in the 1820s that kind of created modern Unitarianism. And so if you're in New England and if you're ever visiting churches in Vermont or New Hampshire or Maine or Massachusetts, you'll see some white steeple church in the middle of town. And most of the time, it's either going to be a Unitarian or a Congregational church. But out here out west, it was a little different religious settlement patterns. So,
right. Here in the South, it was, I guess, basically. It was a largely Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist divide, but I think now the demographics with the Hispanics, that there's a Catholic Church has a footholding here in this region now, and of course, evangelicalism. You have people who are finding that alternative to what was mainline for many years. So I don't know how it is with. I always assumed that your area of the country is heavily Lutheran. So
that's right. It's the largest Protestant church in Montana. The largest church is Catholic, and then after that would be ELCA Lutheran, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. They give you an idea of how words work in America. Evangelical comes from the Protestant word. It's a Protestant term. It meant Protestant church. Those churches that promoted what they call, uh, the evangelical faith. But in the U.S., it now is a right-wing social political connotation. So I feel bad for evangelical Lutheran churches in America because they've got a name that doesn't describe them. They're not fundamentalists. They're not right wing at all. But the term is from an older European usage of the term. So if you're in Germany, you go to it's Evangelische Kirche.
Yeah, evangelical. Yeah, and even in more innocuous meaning of the term in the United States, when it's not a politicized term, um, evangelical in Germany would mean what different from what it would mean here, because I mean Lutheranism basically weren't trying to create a new church; they were trying to reform the Catholic Church.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. So it's useful kind of foray into thinking about the political situation we're in the sense that people identify Christianity with a certain set of right wing politics. And that does represent a significant chunk of folks, to be sure. But there's always obviously been a religious left, and there's always been a social inclusive left in the church throughout American history, and today is no exception. And in surprising places, including in rural Montana, the country. It was kind of highlighted in the TV series, many documentaries. I can't think of it. There was a Western documentary series that was on TV, docudrama, very rural community. And they have an open and affirming UCC church. They have a big rainbow flag. And some right wingers tore it down and vandalized it. And it was very nice because the whole community came together to support that church when they were targeted in that way. Churches are being targeted in this kind of political environment we're in. So
Yeah, and so this whole notion that somebody if somebody is a person of faith, there is a default assumption that they're always going to be right wing, and that's not necessarily the case, or that they're necessarily going to try to badger somebody's or views on others, and that's certainly not the case either. And I always tell people, like, it's kind of like I remember during the time when Bill and Hillary Clinton were trying to do their botched up version of healthcare reform. And I think you and I remember that time. We didn't know each other then, but you and I remember that time very well. It was inadequate to what we both wanted for healthcare. It was part of my political awakening to become a socialist. I realized I wasn't just a liberal anymore. Having that said, while Jerry Falwell was putting out videos denouncing the evils of socialized medicine, and a lot of the Christian right have always opposed universal health care, which shows you that they're not committed to the pro-life cause. Tommy Douglas in Canada, a Scottish-born Baptist minister, is the father of Medicare for all in Canada.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's useful to bring up Jerry Falwell because they've done kind of research. I experienced this in the 90s, but the data kind of bears it out. When Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson became the public face of Christianity, a lot of people in the middle and center left who might have had loose ties to Christianity or not, they stopped identifying as Christian, right? In other words, the 90s, we were always talking about the rise of the nuns, and which is to say, a nun is somebody who's asked in a survey, what is your religion? Are you Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, atheist, whatever? And the answer is none of the above. Don't fit a category, right? And it's exploded. There's been a huge shift in the 90s, the biggest religious shift in American history, and it's to disaffiliation. It initially started in the 90s when the religious right succeeded culturally in defining Christianity in the eyes of many people, which is that it's right wing, it's anti-gay, it's anti-abortion, it's all those things. And I remember a little of that tension when I was an undergrad because I was I was involved in the Clinton campaign back in '92, and I was involved in InterVarsity, which was an evangelical group, and the result was I had Democrats coming up to me going, "How can you be a Christian? It's homophobic. It's anti-science. It's anti-woman." And then I have InterVarsity folks go, "How can you be working with the Democrats? They're, all the flip side, right? They're pro-abortion and whatever, pro special rights for homosexuals, whatever the terms they use." And it had never occurred to me, I think, growing up prior to that era, that there was any division at all. Tommy Douglas kind of came of age, obviously much earlier, but when he brought Medicare for all, it would have been in the 60s. And at that point, if you were on the left or the right, you were probably in church because that's what American society looked like then. And having that, like I said, Baptist background, it's not a big shock that, of course, Christian socialists. There's a wonderful history of Christian socialism in Canada and in the formation of the new Democratic Party. But today, people will look bewildered because.
And to clarify to people what the new Democratic Party is in Canada is a Labor Party to the left of the Liberals.
Yeah, in most cases, yeah. Actually, almost in every case. You're don't do proviso there. Yeah, they are.
Oh, and I just want to interrupt just for a brief moment. First of all, I want to say hi to Miguel online real quick. He's always here. And I see him almost every morning on Heartlands Media on their chat line. Dwight, if you ever get a chance to check out Heartlands Media, it's a great show. It's by Kip Cabello. And this guy here named Steve E said, the Democrats have supplanted the pearl-clutching base of this country. I'm going to say maybe to an extent there's a grain of truth, but I would say that maybe I know what he's talking about, and you and I fit under the category of being part of what I would call we support the woke agenda, but we're not part of the woke left. We're anti-woke leftists, but we support what is woke. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, because I live in Montana, right? And it's a pretty red state, and so the only people I really run into who kind of are who get a little too excited are folks who want to ban books in the libraries here, Billings Public Library. Folks who there's a lot of state legislative races that have really turned on public libraries. It was a real issue whether the library was even going to survive in Great Falls because of right-wing opposition. So I don't doubt that if I was in a deep blue area that, every political movement has its unquestionables, right? But I'm in red America, so that's the stuff I got to deal with.
I think of the Ray Bradbury novel Fahrenheit 451, and about basically it's book burning, and basically this Big Brother society where they're doing the book burning. They have a fire department that goes into finds people who owns books illegally, confiscate them, have them burned. Have you seen the movie?
No, I read the book in school, in a public school. I again, older generation. So yeah, no, I haven't seen the movie.
Yeah. I urge you to watch it. It's a good film. I watch it high because it's kind of for those that like to get high, that is, you get a lot out of it.
Sure.
About that film, there is a correlation. I don't know what year it takes place today, but Fahrenheit 451, it takes place in the future, and and basically, as I said, they're confiscating books and they're burning it. And I don't want to make this a red state versus blue state arguments that some people like to make things. I tell people I don't want either a red state or a blue state. I'm for Cornell West. Let's have some green states. That's what I tell people. But the thing about it is, with regard to blue state versus red states, the censorship actually is most potent in the red states. I mean, Governor DeSantis of Florida and Governor Abbott of Texas lead the nation when it comes to book bannings and all that sort of thing and censorship. Even so-called woke California don't ban books.
Yeah, I think there was a report that came out. Florida's banned over 400 books. And one of the things that's telling is obviously LGBT people are the front lines of that and targeted, but more often than not, it's African American history and African American writers. This reminds me back in the 80s. Remember the Parent Media Resource Council or whatever it was called, PMRC, and they wanted to have labels on all the record labels, all the record albums. But they used to, it was kind of funny because I remember Jello Biafra referred to it as the blacklist. And he goes, it was a blacklist because, well, a lot of the singers are black. It was just, there was a bit of a kind of overlap between what we needed to protect our kids from and black musicians. But here we are again, and now we're doing it with books. So, and like I said, it's usually done in the name of religion, which is unfortunate because, of course, I work in the church, so I don't want to see the church as either censorious or trying to impose a narrow vision of what it means to be a human being. And theologically, I wouldn't want to do that because it's God's world, so it's a pretty big one and pretty diverse in breadth, and also because then why would anybody want to join the church? We have enough censoriousness in our life. We don't need to add more unnecessarily. So I feel like there's something very, especially out in Montana, which is very libertarian, being told what you can read and what you can consume and what you can think and what, it's very un-Montana. We'll go for that.
Yeah, Montana's an interesting state. It's an interesting state. It seems like that the right and the left sort of have a libertarian bent toward things.
Well, historically, that has defined the parties in the state. Obviously, in some ways, MAGA has gone national. So there's a lot of Republicans now in the Montana legislature that look like, well, whatever Trump and DeSantis and company are doing. But that's really unfortunate. And one of my favorite examples was when I was in Wyoming as a pastor. There was a Republican legislator from Gillette, Wyoming, cowboy poet. Her big two passions was marriage equality and being able to kill any animal you want for any reason without any kind of legal limit. Those are her two. And she was a Unitarian, by the way. So she was a Unitarian Republican cowboy poet who was pro-gay marriage and did not want environmental loss.
Actually, that one of the founders of the John Birch Society was a Unitarian.
Oh, goodness.
Robert Welch.
Was a Unitarian?
Yeah, Robert Welch. He was actually born I believe, in Bertie County, North Carolina, which is basically the next county away from where I grew up. And I grew up in Hertford County. And he was a Southern Baptist, but he converted to the Unitarian Church. But I think it was a different Unitarian church at that time. But he died a Unitarian in 1985. But the founder of the John Birch Society, strangely enough, was a Unitarian. I mean, I know that's kind of hard to believe. I mean, weird things happen,
Well, there is this kind of also a discussion about religious polarization. So religion and politics sometimes overlap, but more often than not did not. And especially, again, when most people identified as Christian, it's kind of like whatever was left wing or right wing, it was happening in the church. up until probably the 90s. And that's where you start to see this kind of beginning of polarization. So now people identify this as a complex identities, and that is every facet or feature of life mutually reinforces each other. So, for instance, if I say I am from rural Ranch County in Montana, I drive a pickup truck, I like country music, I own a gun, I go to a Southern Baptist church, who did I vote for president?
I'm going to make the assumption somebody voted for Trump.
Because that county, I'm thinking of Broadus, Montana, and that Powder River County voted for Trump by 90% to 10%, right?
But maybe if I'm going to be generous, maybe that's a peculiar person that may vote libertarian for their own little special economic reasons or what have you, and they may possibly favor marijuana legalization or something like that, but probably otherwise may be in a embrace terrible right-wing ideals. I run across a lot of those.
Yeah. Now the other extreme is in Missoula, which is a college town. It's home of the University of Montana. The precinct. Well, let's just say so. You have this young woman who is a grad student at the University of Montana. She likes yoga. She drives a Toyota Prius. She likes to listen to NPR. She finds spirituality through meditation and kind of being out there in nature. Who did she vote for?
Probably either Joe Biden in the recent election, and it's hard to say who she supported in the primaries.
Oh yeah,
she could have been a Bernie supporter. She
could be a Bernie or
Liz Warren, Pete Buttigieg, maybe Joe Biden. It's hard to say. That's where it gets a little more skewed and all of that. And maybe she voted for Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate.
Could have. I would say the precinct right by side the University of Montana, I think it was like 70% for Biden and maybe like 15 or 10% for Trump, you know. But these are what we call compound identities. They mutually reinforce each other. And so, and notice that religion is usually one of the compound identities. And all it takes is some enterprising person to break the compound identity, right? You know, and so be a Unitarian who's a John Bircher.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to mess with the algorithm, right? But it's useful because if you're able to do that today, so a lot of social scientists call you, you could be an ambassador, you know. I mean, I'd like to think of myself as that because I grew up in rural eastern Montana. That was always Republican, but I kind of grew up in a Democratic home, admittedly. But there's a couple, you know, I'm a white male Protestant minister, right? And I voted for Biden. And, you know, whenever you get those chances to kind of break those multiple layers, it's a little blow against polarization, but it's really impacted how people do religion in this country or consume products or decide if you're going to have a Bud Light, apparently.
Well, I tell you, looking back, and one thing about our friendship in the last 23, 25, is it 24 years, I guess? Yeah, 24 years when we met at that convention, the Socialist Party convention in New Jersey. And we've basically been communicating with each other all these years since then. Mm-hmm. You know, one thing I enjoy listening to you and talking about this is I remember growing up during the days of Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, and how one of the things that I remember about the Reagan Revolution, not every person involved with the Reagan Revolution, because it was a coalition, ideological coalition. But you had your business conservatives, which is pretty standard for Republicans. You had your national security conservatives. You had these folks. Then you had the Christian right, I mean, you had it was like 5 categories, but those are the 3 I'm thinking of at the moment, and I forgot what the other 2 were. But anyway, of why people, I guess your basic Eisenhower Republic people who vote Republican no matter what. But one thing I do remember distinctly about the Reagan Revolution was what I call the Christian right, the religious right, and what a deep impact I saw in the 1980s. Just living in the South, I saw this, and I've always unfortunately, linked this movement with part of the reason why we can't have nice things in America.
Yeah.
Like universal health care, labor unions being is strong, that sort of thing. A robust welfare state, something kind of equivalent to, I think we're going to use a country that you and I find ideal, Norway. Highest standard of living in the world, highest unionization, universal health care, everybody's taken care of. Yeah, I know taxes are a little high, but this people are pretty much content in places like Norway, and but you espouse these things here to the average person and to the religious right, especially when they come out of this Reagan era, and they're part of that MAGA coalition, and they're a little more warped than they were even during the days of Reagan. Again, there's no one size fit all with MAGA either. They'll act like if you espouse these things, you're espousing the works of the devil or something like that.
So this tells you how impotent Reagan was. I'm not saying whether this is true or not, but surveys in the 1970s were had of Republicans and Democrats to the question, do you think the government's doing enough to help the poor? And majorities of Republicans and Democrats in like 76 agreed the government was not doing enough to help the poor. They should be doing a lot more. By 1984, there was a divide. Republicans believed the government was doing too much for the poor. Democrats believed otherwise. That's how potent the messages are from the top. And even this, I think, in the Republican Party today, I mean, it's true that Trump represents the id of the MAGA movement, and obviously we know individuals caught up in it. But I have to think, I don't have to think, but I'm inclined to believe that if the Republican Party or the Democratic Party was responsible in their leadership choices, that too would impact the national discussion and what's possible. And Reagan did a powerful job of shaping the Republican identity against any kind of social welfare kind of policies. And that's how I became a Democrat. Because I shouldn't say that. I grew up in the home of a social worker in the 80s, So we were watching in real time as the social safety net was being demolished in front of our eyes. And I think that's probably why I got into politics, was I really actually believe in the common provision. So yeah, it's not just that Trump is giving MAGA what they want. Trump is shaping and determining what it is that Republicans say they want. And so it's both chicken and egg.
Yeah. Well, to backtrack a second, and I understand. Just make it as clear. I understand what you mean by Democrat. The Reagan Revolution was so successful that even though I do, in the two-party argument, view the Democrats as a lesser evil, they have been somewhat Reaganized too, but not in the cultural war sense per se, but economically they kind of moved away during the days of Bill and Hillary Clinton from the New Deal, even though there's a lot of great people in the Democratic Party itself.
Oh yeah, no, that was why why get involved in the socialists in the 1990s, because nobody was talking about anything that mattered. I mean, it's really hard unless you were there in the 90s to see it, but it was amazingly, I think the word is vapid. It was a vapid era. It was kind of a lost decade, People kind of miss the pop culture, but you wouldn't want to miss the politics, And that includes the impeachment, but it also includes just the kind of stuff that was being talked about. You couldn't break through. There was major issues, crazy levels of income inequality that's even worse today. Uh, the war on drugs had just decimated so many African American communities, and and global trade was changing the very dynamics of manufacturing and whether you could make a go of it in life, right? And we couldn't raise any of that because that's not what Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich talked about. So you join a socialist party, right? You try to do something, or the Greens, or whatever. Just how do you push it, so that we, I think I would say the Iraq War and then the '08 economic crash, especially for millennials who experienced the '08 economic crash, did a lot to radicalize folks. did a lot to broaden the discussion, the political discussion, so that somebody like a Bernie is saying stuff that I think a lot of people just know to be true, right? But that wasn't the case in the 90s. We had to be appealing to a distant land of a future that we couldn't see. When we joined the socialists after the collapse of the Soviet Union. What a great time.
Yep.
The end of history, as Francis Fukuyama called it.
Yeah. Oh, let me on the chat line. Let me answer. Steve E says ignoring Obama's normalizing Bush's junior policy is a big problem. We have acknowledged that Obama is, he certainly didn't provide change and all of that. And so I don't know. I hope just is we're not partisan here. I think he's thinking this. The thing, yeah, and we're not. But what I'm saying is that Obama continued the policies of Bush. It seems like no matter who's in power, they continue the same policies and everything. But the only emphasis I'm saying in this discussion, only in regard to what's going on, the religious right is a problem, and it's a problem that is being persisted by the Republican Party. The Democratic Party might do present a set of problems here and there, but I think the Republicans set greater problems, which is where I would kind of disagree with Jimmy Dore when he was kind of pushing the issue a little too hard on Cornel West. I don't know if you saw that the other day.
Oh no, I didn't.
Yeah, and I understand where he's coming from. A lot of people would interpret him as being a secret Trumper, and that's not the truth. I think he's an accelerationist, and we both will know what an accelerationist tendency is like in the Socialist Party.
We do.
Yeah. And I kind of suffer from it in a way too, but not to the extent that some of our revolutionaries in the party suffer from it. I mean, I was accelerationist trying to push for a social democracy to take place in America. But they wanted something a little further.
Well, it's one of those things. I get the drive because, again, it could feel like politics is broken. But on the other hand, the poor and the most vulnerable really rely on systems working, and even the most basic systems, everything from mass transit and public safety to schools and water. And, a lot of basic functions of a normal government would provide. And if those break apart, the poor always bear the brunt of it. And so there are dreams of what we could achieve, and I get it, but I would never want to develop a left politics that kind of set that aside. When I think about Obama and Bush, I'm assuming he means foreign policy because, I think of healthcare reform as limited as it is as a real significant achievement in the life of the country. that I obviously, in some ways, Obama wanted to compromise it all away. It was Nancy Pelosi said, no, we got to vote for the single package. We want the whole package. We're not going to be able to pass this piecemeal. That was really big. But it's not clear to me that Obama saw the relationship of the world in foreign policy is fundamentally different than Bush. So in that respect, or I should say the chastened Bush, the Bush of Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell, not the first term, right? The second term Bush, having Obama in there didn't seem to fundamentally change that. But I'm very grateful for health insurance because I couldn't have gotten it otherwise. So it was a shift, and it was a shift for whatever reason culturally, where people went insane about having the first black president.
Yeah,
Never
yeah.
recovered from this.
They try to make him out like he was the other, and a secret Muslim born in Kenya trying to hide a birth certificate, and it was a crazy time. I'm just like, I tell people, are you crazy? Obama is the problem with Obama. He's very American. I mean, he's basically a generic centrist Democrat. He's by no means the worst president we ever had. His predecessor, in my opinion, George W. Bush, is the reason why things are so horrible. He's the reason why we ended up with Donald Trump. Yeah, by the way, George W. Bush. The whole mess, the way the United States responded to 9/11, again, the culture war aspect of this. Because, again, with the culture war, supporting the invasion of Iraq was God's will. And if you were opposed to the war in Iraq, you were supporting the Muslim terrorists, and you were against God and against the American. I hate it when the religious right use the term Judeo-Christian, because they're anti-Semitic, a lot of them, and it's their version of virtue signaling.
Well, it is intriguing because at one point, I don't know, it was very bizarre. This is I only mentioned this episode because it's a telling story of the religious right and American politics today and Christian nationalism. So basically, there's a Republican member of Congress from Ohio who was upset because the former state Republican Party, one of the state Republican Party leaders, said that if you don't know Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, you're lost forever. You have no concept of God. You have no concept of anything life worth living, right? And, he's this Republican congressman from Ohio is Jewish. And he goes, yeah, take that down. That's just not cool. That's not a good way to talk about people, right? I'm not, he's not lost because he's Jewish, right? But the religious right just pounded on him, and major religious right personalities just went after this Republican congressman because obviously he's not going to agree that he's lost because he's not a Christian. But it was an telling episode because it was like, you guys use Judeo-Christian, but you don't really mean it. When Christian nationalists talk, they actually want a specific vision of Christianity. And so much so that DeSantis has been embarrassed to talk about his Catholicism because he's afraid that's not going to get the headwinds that he wants. And certainly somebody who's Jewish, who apparently walked into this weird hornet's nest, on Twitter. When Christian nationalists say they want Christian nation, they mean it, and they don't mean Judeo-Christian.
No, they don't. I'm gonna tell you where I first heard of the term Christian nationalism, and I heard of it by reading about a historical figure, a minor figure in American history, by the name of Gerald L.K. Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the American First Party. Then it became the Christian Nationalist Party, and in the 1950s, it morphed into the Christian Nationalist Anti-Communism Crusade. I don't know if you ever heard of them.
I have. Yep.
I figured you would have.
Yeah. No, yeah. Because yeah, there was a lot of reactionary figures that used anti-communism as kind of their platform, their way to get a following. And especially because that's the other kind of thing with the rise of the nuns. It's really hard to imagine up until even the 80s, atheism and communism were kind of associated as the same thing. And the collapse of the Cold War and the start of the culture war coincided with each other in really powerful ways. Not that you can't find antecedents, but the result is it was no longer, from the 90s onwards, it no longer was clear that being an atheist, or at least not going to church or not being a Christian, had anything to do with communism or anything like that. So at the end of the Cold War, we lost our common enemy, and we don't have a common enemy anymore, and so we just have each other. We'll just go to war with each other. So I feel like that's been the last 30 years.
Well, what's really weird is now, strangely enough, I do believe that the 1%, those in the top, and at the end of the day, and I think you would agree with this, that both parties have the same donors, and they're both corrupt. So getting back to the point about Cornel West, as I said, I think that maybe his tone was a little harsh on Cornel West the other day. That the interview that kind of went viral from last week. But Cornel West, a man who come out of a tradition of Eugene Debs and Norman Thomas, and Norman Thomas is, I want to stress that name, very much so. It's providing a kind of a vision, as far as I'm concerned, an Americanized version of what Tommy Douglas, attempted for Canada, and whether we'll get there or not, it remains to be seen, as long as this constitutional republic or representative democracy, whatever we want to call this experiment called the United States, exists. But anyway, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I had two questions. One is, I don't want to demonetize you, but I was wondering if I could do
monetize.
If I could do a Christopher Hitchens and in our second hour, I'm going to bum a cigarette, but
I have to get up to 1,000 to be monetized.
Okay, so I'll go do that. I don't know if tobacco is a part of that, but tell me more about the Jimmy Dore. I didn't see the interview, so I don't know what you're referencing.
I understand where he's coming from and all that. I'm it was just they had a back and forth, and he basically, Cornel West was he was saying that Trump is a fascist, which I do think that he placates to fascists in his coalitions, but Jimmy Dore wanted to for Cornel West to acknowledge that Joe Biden is a fascist.
Jimmy Dore wanted Cornel West to say that. Okay.
Yeah, and because I think that when Jimmy Dore's case, and is that he's an accelerationist, and I do think to an extent that fascism, if you want to take the ugly racism out of it, and make it more, not that Mussolini was any tolerant person on the race question, but next to Hitler, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I think that the corporations and state merging together is kind of one of the merriest meanings of fascism. So in that sense, there is even though they disagree, the two parties, there is a march toward authoritarianism, to cancel culture by both sides. It's not just a liberal thing, and that's another thing I've always wanted to make that clear, that that unfortunately a lot of liberals and progressives, some of them are guilty of it, but I get irritated when it's always the finger pointing is in this day and age is always at everybody on the left, as if they are the practitioners of council culture and all of that. And I think council culture is also very bipartisan. And that's what I was saying earlier. And look at the cancel culture in Florida by the Florida fascists, by the Texan fascists. Both of them human traffickers that would take a portion of the Hispanic population and send them to a blue state just to do a culture war gotcha and a troll. When I think that there ought to be trafficking charges put upon DeSantis and Governor Abbott. And I was going somewhere with this, but
this is Jimmy Dore going after Cornel West.
Well, basically, he wanted to acknowledge that Joe Biden, and that's what I was going to say, that Joe Biden is as much of a fascist as my understanding that Joe Biden is as much of a fascist as someone like Donald Trump, which I understand with the incarceration rate that took place because of the crime bill in the 1990s and things like that, and I would say because of the attempt to create a disinformation governance board last year, things of that nature. But you know what? If that Ministry of Truth would have stood and be an entity, I doubt that any Republican president would dismantle it. They would use it.
Yeah. So okay. So that was well. And Cornell's what was Cornell's West response to Jimmy Dore's?
Cornel West's response basically was Trump, and now I think that he felt like Trump is basically the voice of fascism. He wanted to reach out toward those that voted for Trump, and to try to urge them to basically embrace the progressive values and all of that. And the thing about it is, I think that the controversy is going over there, browbeating people and telling them you voted for Trump, therefore you're a fascist. Please don't be a fascist. Mm-hmm. There are people who voted for Obama twice and voted for Clinton and voted Democrat in these 4 states that went over to Trump in 2016. They did so because of the trade policies that the Democrats embrace, which ironically are championed by the Republicans even louder, to tell you the truth. But it just kind of shows you that both parties are corrupt. But I'm speaking personally, and I'm not. I tell people they can vote however they want to vote, but I've gotten, as you probably noticed, I've gotten very independent in the last few years.
Oh, yeah, I mean, so again, my sense, and I haven't really followed Jimmy Dore, but it is going to be pretty conventional. I think Trump, and not necessarily every Republican, but I think Trump in his person is a fundamentally authoritarian person. And
I do too.
And I think January 6th is an indication of a level that very few people would be willing to do that he did. And if you've seen the governing documents that a lot of the right wing is putting out, in what could be a second Trump presidency, it would be a form of government that just simply hasn't existed in the U.S. It would be that kind of level of authoritarianism. And he would use the government in really obviously potent ways against its political enemies. But
I think he would try. I think he would try to some degree.
Yeah,
but I think there still be checks and balances that would stop it or slow it down. And I think there's that, but I think he's tremendously incompetent.
Well, a lot of these documents come out are basically trying to say, well, you are limited in your first term. We want to make sure you're not so limited in your second term, right? So I guess I'm going to disagree with Jimmy Dore and saying, like, look, the authoritarian moment, while everybody can be tempted with authoritarianism, the way in which Trump has harnessed a veritable cult of personality Nobody does this with Mike Pence, right? And nobody's going to do this with Nikki Haley, right? So it's not just having right wing politics or left wing politics, right? It's got to be this culmination of reactionary politics that is in the service of a cult of personality, and really Donald Trump represents that. And I don't think you could make the argument that Joe Biden represents anything like that, right? So if the choices are between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, if one is an anti-fascist, I mean, inevitably you'd end up voting for Joe Biden. Now, I'm in your boat. I'm not going to tell people not to vote green. And obviously we know that the election really matters in 12 states or 10, right? In Montana, Trump is going to win it. If he's the nominee, well, it doesn't even matter if he's the nominee. If it's a Republican candidate, they'll win Montana.
They'll win North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we know. Yeah, that's how that is working right now. And so, people making strategic decisions saying, look, Cornel West represents my values, so this is what I want to see and how I want to express it. That totally makes sense. But I think what Jimmy Dore is trying to do is to minimize folks who might be tempted to vote for Joe Biden. And I just don't think you could pull off the case, right? I think most Americans are on the center left are aware of the dangers of a Trump presidency and a unique kind of threat that he poses. Right. And so I think he's got us talking to the wind there. I think Cornel West is more apt to be aware of how voters are talking.
Let's answer this person here. He says if Biden blows some people up and jails some journalists, it's okay because Trump didn't do it. No, that's not what we're saying at all. And Trump and Biden has one thing in common, Steve. Trump had an opportunity to pardon Julian Assange. He didn't. And Joe Biden is not doing anything to pardon Julian Assange. So, and if nobody's willing to do anything for Julian Assange, somebody with, I'm assuming your point of view, Steve, is conservative. And so anybody who can't get themselves to support the idea of freeing a journalist that really didn't break any laws. I'm afraid, Steve, you're the one being partisan.
Well, I would only mention the issue that I kind of think of, because I remember this in the Obama presidency. Obama oversaw, and this is where I think the original criticism of Bush and Obama oversaw the expansion of what became known as the drone program, right? And that was clearly, I remember that in both 16 and 12, Romney versus Obama. Why vote Obama? He's literally using drones for extrajudicial killings, right? This is like crazy. And I totally get that. And but one of the things was, it was weird because Trump was passed off as kind of like, well, he's going to be the anti-war candidate, and in 16, against Hillary. And I get that because of Hillary's background, but it was really intriguing. The moment Trump became president, he dramatically increased the drone program, dramatically. Most of the safeguards that there were any were basically tossed to the four winds. Trump was a big fan of it. One of the things that happened when Biden became president is he put so much regulations on drones that drone strikes have basically disappeared as a tool of American foreign policy. That doesn't mean that you can't critique Biden on foreign policy, obviously, but it does mean that, I have to admit, I was hoping all my friends on the left would notice that Biden had basically eliminated drones as a tool of foreign policy and would be applauding Biden or thinking that he was doing something that they'd all been calling for, and it never happened. Biden's not going to get credit for something like that, right? But it's one of I'm not even going to say that Biden is like a Jimmy Carter, like he's a great peace candidate or something. But I am saying, right now every Republican candidate for president is calling for the invasion of Mexico, and Ron DeSantis will not rule out using missiles against against Mexico, right? Which is crazy. It's crazy to invade your neighbor, right? And so, if I was looking for the peace candidate, I could be tempted with, I could see a Cornel West, right? I get that. I don't get Trump, or I don't get any of the Republican candidates as purveyors of a nonviolent, foreign policy.
Well,
It's just not in the cards.
I tell you what kills me about the foreign policy of the Republicans in 2023. Probably the closest thing, and I say this as a pacifist. I'm saying this as a pacifist. The closest thing I will come to agreeing with them is I'm opposed to the proxy war with Ukraine, because I know the history. I'm not going to debate the thing about it. I'm not going to debate the Russia-Ukraine war per se, except that I am anti-war, and they're going to be correct on that. But they shoot themselves in the foot, because while they're kind of, they're steering toward being correct on that issue, they're rattling the sabers for China over Taiwan. And don't they think that if they upset China, they're also going to be upsetting Russia? I mean, it's bad either way, And I don't want to start world war. I don't want to start a nuclear war over any country, whether it's over Ukraine or over Taiwan. And it's not because I favor Russia coming in there. I don't favor China going into Taiwan. I don't. But I also don't want to have World War III. And so the Republicans have fooled a lot of people into thinking they're anti-war when they're not. Now Trump's foreign policy, I would say, maybe is more dovish than, let's say, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney's. I will say that much. But then he ruined it by withdrawing out of the peace treaty. The one great thing Obama did was the peace treaty with Iran, and that treaty was working. It was an opportunity to acclimate Iran to the West. And to prevent Iran from being a nuclear weapons power nation, and to help Iran to acclimate toward the West, because I think that in the Middle East, democracy has potential in Iran, but the United States don't need to interrupt that and be interrupting it. I think the United States is actually going to prevent it from being a democracy if it stays on the course it stays. Like Trump did a war crime with the killing of Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad with that drone strike. Remember that in early 2020?
Yeah.
Well, and I would say too that there's a weird Russian politics going on. It has to do, especially in the far right, with somehow the identification with Putin as this warrior against modernity, LGBT people, the European Union, liberal Western values, I've, if you see the role of like Tucker Carlson, almost kind of making Putin into like a Christian emperor. And it feels very odd to me when you consider the fact that over 85% of Ukrainians are in fact, Christian, and they're the ones being killed. I honestly think so. Steve said that, well, Obama embraced the Bush doctrine. And I think that there's an argument for that, to be sure. But I think that subsequent to Obama, during the Trump years and where we are at as Americans politically, is all foreign policy seems to be in reference to American domestic policy. We don't really have a vision of ourselves in the world. We have a vision of how foreign policy plays into whatever the culture war is. So Russia really hates gays, so they must be like the allies that we need, but it's not in relationship to what's going on there as much as it's a relationship to American domestic politics. I mean, why send missiles into Mexico? Well, it's of course a part of the fear about immigration, right?
Yes, good point about that, because they want to go and invade Mexico. That's insanity.
I mean, that's kind of the bit where I'm like, we don't have, and I could critique both parties for this, but we've not had a public discussion. The Iraq War imploded whatever consensus might have existed about what the U.S. is in the world, and nobody has articulated, as far as I can tell, well, I mean, in the two parties, a fundamentally different alternative vision. And so, so everything's in reference to domestic policy, including, I think, the withdrawal from Afghanistan by Biden, right? It had more to do with, we're just tired being there 20 plus years. But I think in the end, American domestic politics has a way of obscuring anything that's going on around the world. The other example always is Israel, right? How much of Israel has anything to do with what's going on in Israel and among the Palestinians, and how much of it has to do with, you know, folks who dream about the end times, Bible prophecies, the religious base, the Jewish base in the Democratic Party, and the religion, which is not uniform, obviously, in its relationship to Israel. And in the Republican side, the religious right has apocalyptic dreams for the region. But that's no way to do a foreign policy, right?
No, that's the thing right there. It is based on a culture war. Now, regarding Putin, I do think that Putin's treatment of LGBTQ people is horrific. But that's true in the Ukraine. That's true throughout Eastern Europe. It's true throughout the Middle East. And I oppose it whenever it's tried. I oppose it if it's tried in Nebraska. I don't care where it's supposed. In that regard. But and that is a big problem I do have with regard to Russia. With regard to the Israel-Palestinian conflict and everything, that's definitely tied to a domestic culture war, because they try to, if you criticize Israel, um, and I finally decided that is to stop being scared of being called a bigot over that issue, just because I told people they need to stop discriminating against the Palestinians, and they just increased the discrimination. It's the most far right government that they've ever had. And I'm sure that the evangelical and the fundamentalist Christians who have a neoconservative Bush Cheney style foreign policy were happy when that recent election happened in Israel, with the super far right, with the left being virtually eliminated from society politically.
Yeah, no, that's so there's a backstory too. You and I wrote that statement for the Socialist Party.
I remember that. Yes.
I don't know when that was.
David actually did have one ballot criticism. We did accidentally omit some important points off.
Well, I'm sure I'd have to take a look at it, because like 20 years ago. But yeah, no. But it was interesting and weird to try and negotiate those kind of politics. But I think Christian nationalism is affecting, as well as the war in Iraq, affecting the way we talk. And so we just don't have, any kind of language anymore to talk about foreign policy. And I think this is why the left, whatever side one is on in Ukraine, we have not had a common conversation. So it's like we've had some inherited assumptions from the from the Iraq Middle East wars, and we've also had inherited assumptions from the Cold War. And so trying to re-situate ourselves to go, okay, well, what kind of world do we live in now? And what does a democratic left politics look like as it relates to the world? I mean, these are all good conversations. I feel like what we have isn't doing it, but presumably that's a project to work on. But if it's any consolation, the right hasn't figured it out either.
Mm-hmm.
There is no right wing. There's no right wing foreign policy at this point, right? It's all domestic. It's all domestic.
Well, I mean, everything that the right wing is involved with is culture war related, economically, foreign policy wise, socially. I mean, right down to the ecology of this planet. They try to paint you out some kind of neo pagan if you acknowledge that global warming is real. And then if you get an odd snowstorm, like in North Carolina, I remember we haven't had a snow in about 3 years in North Carolina. And the area of North Carolina I live, there was not even a little ounce of snow from 2005 to early 2008. And then as soon as there was a little bit of snow, one of the right-wing radio shows, talk show hosts locally said, "Oh, we got plenty of global warming snow," as if that's some sort of gotcha. The fact that we didn't have 2 big snowstorms a year like I was used to growing up tells me that it's not neo-pagan to say global warming is real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm trying to figure out, I don't know I mean, it's baffling politics there. I think in the end, it's like whatever environmentalism comes out. I heard this was years ago, but the head of the Green Party then in the UK say, well, look, what you got to do is you got to make environmental sustainability so easy, so cheap, if not free, so accessible to people. That's just the natural thing you're going to want to do. Right? If you treat environmentalism as a form of self-discipline and limits, especially for the poor who face nothing but limits in life, you're going to produce resentment. And so, for instance, I mean, they were arguing for free transit, free train, right, in the UK. Because if you're going to ride train, it saves a lot of money if it was free, right? Or I'm trying to think of another example of this, but well, just the kind of the only time I used mass transit, I was in Minneapolis, and I did it because they have a good mass transit system. And it was just a lot cheaper. It was a lot cheaper than trying to park my car in downtown Minneapolis, right? Ride the bus. But now that I live in Montana, where we don't have a reliable mass transit system, it would take hours and hours to get anywhere, right? So, of course, I hop in my car immediately and off I drive, right? Because everything in our town is organized around you having a car. But you don't have to organize things that way. You can make it easy. Environmentalism doesn't work as an effort to scold people. It's got to be an effort to make life easier, more appealing, And if the environmentalists have that, I don't think there's any persuasion that the right wing has outside of folks who seem to be invested in certain industries.
I remember when I was in London, I used their transit system. I believe it was called an Oyster card. I don't know why they called it that.
Okay.
But I bought it at the train station. I think it was the Victoria train station in London. And I bought a week pass so I could use the train, I could use the bus, I could, whenever I wanted to, and bought it for a week. And I'm gonna tell you, I'm not sure how public or private. I don't know. Margaret Thatcher privatized it in the 80s, or if it still public. I don't know the situation. All I do know is that when I used that public transit system in London, it was one of the best public transit systems I've ever used in my life. I mean, it was so smooth. I mean, I hear people, locals, complain about it. I had no complaints about it. I guess the grass is greener on the other side. I guess if that's what you're used to, you're going to find more fault in it or what have you. But I had no problem with it at all. It got me to where I needed to go. The only thing I had to wait for the train or the bus. But that was about it. But it's just so sad of that capitalism, that a lot of cities, medium and large cities, has trolleys, streetcars, and some semblance of a mass transit system here in the United States. And the three automakers decided to go and buy it up to improve it, and they got rid of it to force people to become more reliant on the automobile.
There's some good if you want to go down the rabbit hole of YouTube videos, urban planners, city enthusiasts, I guess you call them, right? But they and there have been some cities that have made some remarkable progress, and surprising places like Las Vegas, Nevada, that you wouldn't expect, right? And weirdly enough, Charlotte, North Carolina, which was noted as the most geographically diverse space, spread, the sprawl is heavy there, right? But the city of Charlotte is doing some concrete things to make it a bit easier for folks to not have to rely on the car. So a lot of it is just, how do we organize our society, and that produces ease and comfort in whatever decisions that we make. It kind of goes along the idea of the rational choice theory. People are going to go for the easiest route. And so if you have a left politics, it's always got to be something that works with people's intuitions and what's most practical for folks to utilize. One of the things that strikes me as amazing about the Christian nationalist politics is that some of that stuff has no relationship to the world that we actually live in. But I think a good, solid politics always will. It will always be like, yeah, people like that. They want that, kind of thing. So that gives me some hope for left politics. If it's done right, it'll make life easier for folks.
We both got accused of engaging in Democratic talking points.
Oh, well, what happened was, I'll tell you the background story. So one time I was meeting with George Soros, and he said, look, I really need you to start spreading propaganda for the Democratic Party. So to the partisan issue, outside of Republican parties, maybe in New England, I don't think the Republican Party is a party of government. Now, I've seen what the New York Democratic Party did to implode on itself. So it's not like everywhere. But if you were looking for signs of hope, the Democrats in Michigan and Minnesota, are doing it. So it's possible to have good government. As far as I can tell, there's only one party that's attempting that, but I will say that it varies by state. So if New York has been kind of this ultimate example of really self-defeating policies, both in the that sabotage things in so many ways. And so I don't want to suggest Democrats always get it right. Largely the question is, do you think government could work? And is it worth trying? And, again, in New England, I think there's some Republicans that have that track record. But for the most part, in most places in the country, it would be Democrats, generally speaking. It wouldn't be the Republicans. And that's bad. That's bad for democracy. Because that's not the case everywhere in the world.
It would be
conservative parties.
It would be if I lived in Montana, if I lived in Minnesota, and we talked about this on my show last week, my side show, side project that I'm hoping is going to carry a long way. So everybody in the audience, if you look up at YouTube, a Bragland show, please subscribe. I will provide that information in a short while. But we discussed that in Bragland last week about Minnesota doing what's the miracle in Minnesota. and it was Breonna Joy Gray, Kyle Klinsky, Crystal Ball. They were, Crystal and Kyle were taking a pro Biden, rah rah rah. We got to get behind Biden. Breonna Joy Gray, being the fierce independent that she is, was making her case for Cornel West. But I would say that in the case of Minnesota, I mean, it comes right down to even the name of the political party. And you lived in Minnesota, so in
the DFL, yeah, the Democratic Farm Labor.
Even the party's name in Minnesota is cooler than the Democrats in the rest of the country. Democratic Farmer Labor Party, because I think that the Farmer Labor Party aspect of it is the biggest reason why that they're probably a little further left than the rest of the country.
And it's amazing it's within a 1-seat majority. So, but yeah,
league in North Dakota, by the way, Democratic Party, nonpartisan league.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's such a it's such a deep red state that it's hard. It's called the NPL Democrats NPL, for them to make significant headway in that state. Though they've had some localized success, but not statewide success as of late. But yeah, so I think the thing is, it's not so much that I'm impressed with Democrats everywhere. I mean, but Mitt Romney's resignation, but his attempt to his retirement. He did an interview, I think, with Atlantic magazine. His retirement, he kind of spilled the beans on exactly how he thinks authoritarianism has come to kind of shape the modern MAGA movement and the Republican Party. And Romney obviously is alarmed. And I think he's right to be. So I don't make any bones about where I think the Republican Party is at in 2023.
Yeah, but he called for.
He's got it right.
He called for the arrest. He's called for the arrest. I mean, I have a problem with Tulsi Gabbard on a few issues, but he called for her to be arrested. And
you're going to read Romney?
Yes, he did. Don't you remember that? Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember.
Yeah, he did. I believe it was sometime late last year. He called for her to be arrested for about the what was it, the bioweapons labs that's in the Ukraine, and some people would say that she's part of the what David Pacman called the anti-imperialist left or what have you. Certainly on foreign policy, she would fit that mold, but I kind of walked away from her with some of her socially conservative stance. I just she's definitely a mixed bag.
She's a mixed bag, but if you look at it, so the Atlantic is always an intriguing magazine, and it's intriguing because it was a historically center right magazine, but so of course they're going to interview Romney, right? But in terms of where the U.S. is situated in terms of the future of our democracy, it's a good one. It's a concern. I mean, the left, in the end, I think has a shot as long as we really do, as long as we're a democratic society, right? We can win. We've got the issues, we've got the, but you can create, it wouldn't be a rush. It might be like a competitive authoritarian or non-competitive authoritarianism, or kind of a semi, like Wisconsin, where 55% of people in Wisconsin voted Democrat in the last election in the legislature, and the legislature is 2-1 Republican. Well, so most people in Wisconsin obviously wanted to vote Democrat, but they've gerrymandered the districts in a crazy way. Well, yeah, then the left will lose inevitably, right? If you can gerrymander it and do that kind of stuff. But So the left has to, I think, be invested in what are the strategies you do to preserve or expand or strengthen democracy, and whether that's multi-rank vote choosing or public financing or overturning Citizens United or getting the politicians not to pick the legislative districts, right?
All of the above.
All of the above,
I would actually add term limits and I would add term limits too, because and not just to Congress. Look what Mitch McConnell did in terms of the Supreme Court prior to the 2016 election, prior to the 2020 election. He did the opposite strategy to make sure that the Supreme Court shifted a little further to the right. There's a way to circumvent this stuff. Either the Democrats threaten to expand the courts, or probably something that's an easier sell, term limits for the courts.
Yeah, and also there's the issue of the cognitive abilities. We know the story of Dianne Feinstein and even Mitch McConnell himself. And I don't know why we've never passed the baton. That was the other thing Romney said, right? Pass the baton. And I will say that the other thing that gives me, I don't so much have the confidence in the Democratic Party of Chuck Schumer or even Nancy Pelosi, though I did credit her with the Affordable Care Act, or that generation, as much as I do to the fact that, the Democrats in red America just kick butt. Montana's got Zoe Seffer, who's a trans legislator, right, from Missoula.
Oh, I remember her.
Yeah, or that one Democrat from Nebraska who was like literally filibustering the whole, session, kind of to stop the kind of the anti-trans legislation that Nebraska is doing. But there are some a new generation of younger Democrats that I have some hope in and confidence in.
But there is a danger that they could there's a danger, because the danger is, remember, Nancy Pelosi campaigned for Medicare for all back in the 1990s, and she's not for it today. So
yeah, the proximity to power, right? I mean, it's one of those things the left always has to deal with. So basically, obviously, you want a majoritarian politics that went over most of the country, but we've definitely got a system and a set of rules that the balance is not for democratic forces. And so, yeah, anybody who gets close to power, they're never quite as impressive as when they start out. So I get that. I don't know if there's a period in American politics where that wasn't the case, including for socialists. I mean, New Democrats have had this in Canada when they have legislative power. But as long as you could pass stuff that genuinely can be built on and shifts what's called the Overton window. I don't know, the window of acceptable distance.
Yeah, the Overton window, and Minnesota is the argument for it. It's just we have all these states. I mean, I live in North Carolina. I have no hopes for the Democrats here.
Yeah, the weird thing, because people have commented on North Carolina and Georgia. The difference between Georgia and North Carolina is how big the triangle is. So Atlanta, Georgia is now almost 60% of the Georgian population, the Atlanta metro area.
Right.
And triangle is 40% for North Carolina. So the triangle needs to get bigger. People need to move to North Carolina. Build up that triangle,
Where I live is just outside the Research Triangle Park. Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and Cary's part of the RTP now. And Johnson County, I think in about 20 years, it will be part of the RTP. Yeah. So
it'll shift North Carolina politics as that develops, but.
But I, as I said, you live in North Carolina, and you see Democrats who pretty much are standard Democrats who stand for nothing, and you get kind of like, ugh. But then you see Minnesota, and you see the DFL people, doing great things. Just kind of like, it's kind of like a mixed message.
Yeah, no, I can. Well, that's everything's politics regional. I actually have thought about that. Like, so look, I always wondered if you could do this in the US. So in Canada, you have a situation where the provincial parties are not the same as the national parties. Sometimes they go by different names, right? So like in Saskatchewan, the Conservatives are called the Saskatchewan Party, I think, right? And the Liberals in British Columbia are right wing.
That is true too.
Yeah,
they rather have the Liberals than the NDP in British Columbia.
Yeah, those are your two choices. If you vote right, you vote Liberal. If you vote left, you vote NDP. But what the NDP has done, the reason why they do well, especially in the West, is the Liberal Party is very much associated with what is called, I don't know, it's called the St. Lawrence River. There's this, like how people talk about the coastal elites in the U.S., right? But in Canada, it's most half the population is along the St. Lawrence River, right? And obviously, and the Liberal Party has historically kind of dominated those particular areas, but it's politically toxic if you're in a small farm town in Saskatchewan, right? But you need an alternative to the right wing. Well, you can always vote NDP. And in fact, the NDP had a special election early last month, and they picked up a number of seats. Don't know this, whether they ever are in a position to get power again. It's hard to say right now. But the only thing to say is that they're not tied. And I think of that because I think there are some Democrats in red states where it's like, look, you need to just call yourself the Bull Moose Party or something, right? And the Republicans in like Massachusetts or New Hampshire, or whatever, Vermont, you probably need to be something else. So in Minnesota, it was the DFL and the Independent Republican Party. Right. It was the IR. And but I think that's separation. It also would break up the binary two-party system, right? Just to go, if you're voting for parties that form their own policy apart from the national, maybe they could represent that region in a specific way.
Well, it's funny you mentioned stigma. It's funny you mentioned that because when the party that we belonged to in the 1990s, early 2000s, the Socialist Party, when I was actually trying to charter the Socialist Party in North Carolina, the thought of calling it the Independent Labor Party of North Carolina crossed my mind, or because in Virginia it was called the Social Democratic Party of Virginia, but that's a little bit that's a little sectarian talk for a lot of people. Are like, what?
Yeah, try to get those names, but I mean, because in Denmark they've got like 8-10 political parties in their parliament, and they cover the entire spectrum.
But Puerto Rico, the Democratic Party in Puerto Rico is called the Popular Democratic Party. Do you know what the Republican Party's called in Puerto Rico? This is going to blow your mind. They're called the New Progressive Party.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, the right-leaning party in Jamaica is the Labor Party versus the People's National Party, which is the left party in Jamaica, which, that's kind of, I mean, the People's National Party the name sounds more right-wing. I mean, but it's actually a left party. And in Jamaica, the conservatives are called the Labor Party, which that sounds left-wing, but they're not,
So I do a critical thinking course sometimes, and we have to analyze political speeches. So I always do Australia. And I do because A, they speak English, and B, nobody knows who they are. So the students don't know what they're supposed to agree with. But 3, the right-wing party in Australia is the Liberal Party, right? The left is Labor, of course. But the right-wing is the Liberals. And in some places, the National Party. But so they're listening to some speech and like, I don't know what I'm supposed to think about it. And you're like, oh no, you don't have to worry about it. Just analyze the issue of the argument. You don't have to worry about their party. You don't have to know who they are. You know? And it's really helpful, right? Because the moment Trump or Hillary gets on the screen, well, they know exactly what they're supposed to think. And you're like, okay, well, that's shutting down discussion now, right? I've done it with English politics, but weirdly enough, English in Canada, the parties are almost too close to the U.S. in some ways these days that it would be easy for folks to be able to plug themselves in. So Australia kind of defies the categories.
Yeah, well, especially with a deceptive name like the Liberals being the center right in Australia. And in Portugal, you know what the center right parties call in Portugal?
No.
You're going to be weirded out when I tell you what they're called. They're called the Social Democrats.
Oh, wow, okay.
And the Socialist
is the Party.
Huh?
Yeah, I think I've seen that before.
It has a rooster as their emblem.
Oh, wow, okay. I just realized I have to send this. But the parties, yeah. In Denmark, you know, they've got two libertarian parties. A right-wing libertarian party and a left-wing libertarian party.
Libertarians have written run, I think, under the UKIP label.
Which one? Oh, yeah, that's right. That's exactly where they go. So, I can't remember what they're called. I think it's the Social Liberal Party is the conservatives that really want tax cuts and deregulation in Denmark. And the Radical Party is the libertarians who are like, we are pro-immigrant and drug legalization, you know, things like that.
More like an anarchist party, possibly.
Yeah, so they both do a good job of trying to rein in, because they're all one's a part of the red bloc and one is a part of the blue bloc, right? And so they always form coalitions, but they reflect they kind of limit their coalitions from going too out of bounds, you know.
I want to share you a story. I told you this story, but I want to share it with the audience. You weren't able to make it to that Socialist Party convention in 2003, which, you know, and
where was it?
Yeah. Oh, that was a very contentious event, a convention.
Yeah.
But what happened after the convention was the interesting part, because as I was getting on the bus back toward the airport, I talked to a young lady from Denmark. And she, you know, she came from the hotel, and we struck up a conversation, and I told her we were having a Socialist Party convention, and she looked really, really perplexed listening to the idea of socialists meeting in the United States. So I gave her a copy of the Socialist magazine. Ah, the rose. She saw the rose on the cover.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, she recognized what kind of socialists we were. And so, you know, just anyway, it was just that was kind of nice. And I think you got a similar story about a Socialist Party banner with the red, the carnation.
Yeah, there was a period of time. So I tried to convince the socialists to be a part of the Pride festivals in Minnesota, and they we had the national office lent us the red carnation banner, you know, for the Socialist Party USA. And yeah, we ran into a lot of European socialists. I feel like it was either German or Scandinavian. You know, and they recognized that carnation right away, you know, and they're like, wait a minute, I didn't know there was something like this in the US. Yeah. So it's a very powerful symbol. Where was the 03 convention?
In Chicago. It was in Chicago. That was the one that nominated Walt Brown for president.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that was, as I said, it was a contentious. It was, the convention was contentious with Eric Chester, Walt Brown, Don Newmax, and Lisa Weltman. I can't believe I'm remembering these names, you know. But anyway,
yeah, I'm remembering some of these. So the only thing is
Ben Burgess.
And Ben Burgess. Oh my
goodness. Ben Burgess at that convention. Little did he know, and I know that we would be influencers. He'd be a more successful version of one, but
I bumped into him, well, rhetorically online. There's, he's kind of ran with this concern about trans people, right? That they're inhibiting left wing politics. But the interesting thing about most of the culture war issues is they always have a class component. And one of the things we do know is that trans people of any group is the most economically vulnerable group pretty much in the U.S. outside of undocumented immigrants, right? In terms of income, in terms of vulnerability to any economics. And so, if you're going to develop a left economic analysis, but not include trans people, it's going to be very it's going to be contradictory is what it's going to be.
Now, with the gay and lesbian community, with it not including the trans in this particular situation, the bigotry against the lesbian, bisexual, gay community is equivalent to anti-Semitism in the sense that is almost very similar. They view most gays and lesbians as upwardly mobile, economically well-off people that they're trying to scapegoat because most of them are college educated. Whatever. Not trying to generalize, but
yeah. Well, I mean, statistically, they're actually a little bit of a disadvantage, but it's like I said, most of that is because of trans folks' economic precariousness. It's, but there's always been the demographic that the media is interested in, and especially advertisers, right? And like you said, it's economically mobile. Maybe they don't have kids. They've got disposable income. This is a group. I mean, I remember in the 90s, okay, so going to that same Pride Festival in Minneapolis, there was some sort of syndicalist group in Minneapolis, and they were like, basically trying to make Stonewall radical. Don't let it sell it out to the corporations, right? Because even in the 90s, so many corporations were at Pride, selling their, it's like gay insurance or gay house windows and upgrades and get that new bathroom. And this guy had written a plaintive plea to not commercialize Pride, right? And there is a point to it because we know that all these advertisers, when it got politically hot, will drop us like a hot potato, right? So it's not really born out of any solidarity as much as economic gain. But it does, like I said, it's a stereotype that's also born that fits some folks, but especially for trans folks, it's just not their reality. And that's where I think a left-wing analysis economic analysis would be really helpful for relating to that those sets of issues. So, I mean, like, workplace rights end up mattering quite a bit, especially for trans folks on a number of issues. So, yeah, so I don't know. I'm not somebody that Ben Burgess would respond to, but I work with trans college students and obviously gay and lesbian and bi college students. So, they're in their 20s, most of them, and kind of facing life in red Montana.
Yeah. Red North Carolina, all that. I will probably have to go very shortly, but I enjoyed this conversation here, Dwight, and as I said, let's see, 20. Yeah, I guess next year will be like a quarter of a century we known each other.
This is true. This is true. I'll close with this.
It's a crime against the color schema and everything we know about political labels that the red in the U.S. does not indicate the left, and the blue somehow does. Christian CBS News for this.
Yeah, it's a lot of it's a society based on projection, though. Yeah, and I guess that's the gist of what we were talking about for almost the last 2 hours here. But it's always interesting having these discussions and all of that, and just I'll make a very quick announcement. I saw Warren on the chat line. I don't know if he's still on, so let me go and do a shout out for the secret show. So hold on a second here, if I can find it. All right, let's do this real quick. And Dwight, if you ever get a chance on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, if you and Jim are up, it'll be, let's see, it's 12 o'clock. It'll be 10 p.m. in your time. If you ever get a chance, watch the secret show on Saturday night for you. It'll be Saturday night for you and Jim over there in Montana. The secret show hosted by Uncle Warren and Jimmy. These two folks here. It's a great show. It's political, but it's also kind of laid back, and non-political discussions are, there's non-political content on the show too, so
that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. As I said, they're both great people. I've been a guest on the show Extra Booyah in the past, and he's been a guest on my show too. So, and Jimmy, she's been a guest here. And now every Friday we have a new show, and it's called Bragland. So everybody should get a chance. Please go ahead and subscribe to Braglands, and subscribe to Braglands. And it's the new show co-hosted by yours truly, Willie Bragg and Jimi Sunderland. And so tomorrow's episode is September things. So we're going to be talking about, with various subjects, political, entertainment, wise culture, and as I said, every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So in your case, it'll be 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, Dwight. If you want to go drop by the chat line, and it's on my channel too, by the way.
Okay, perfect.
Show.
Perfect.
So, so we have a separate channel. We're trying to grow that channel, but we're putting it on our platforms. But we also have a main Bragland channel that's being put up. I haven't got the Rumble channel set up yet for Braglands, but I do have a Rumble channel now for the Willie Bragg Show, and I would like the left to take over Rumble, because the real discrimination is against the left. It's against the left. It's not that, nobody's trying to, nor nobody should, but nobody's trying to take Ben Shapiro off the air, although he will pretend like they're trying to take him off the air. Nobody's trying to take Sean Hannity off the air. Nobody's doing these things, and just that's the thing I want to go and stress that, that people who accuses the left of cancel culture, the left are the victims of cancel culture by the right. So.
Well, that sounds great. I really appreciate it. I'll take a look and see what you end up posting, and I appreciate the conversation and always up for it. So.
Okay, yeah. And I'm going to, I guess, do my closing remarks. If you want to stick around for a few minutes, I need to talk to you real quick about something. So let me just say goodbye to everybody here. So I want to wish everybody a great weekend. Be sure to drop by tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Braglands. And you can watch it on this channel here on the Willie Bragg Show, by the way. And on Saturday night / Sunday morning, midnight, watch The Secret Show, co-hosted by Warren and Jimmy. If you like what you heard, please press like and comment. Comment if you disagree. We'll have a conversation. Please feel free to share the content on this channel. As a First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you to create your own platform and utilize it, because we are the muckrakers of our time. Always reject corporate media. And if you haven't done so yet, please go ahead and subscribe to my show on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, and Rumble. And subscribe to Bragland on all the other platforms as well that I just mentioned. Everyone, take care. I will see y'all tomorrow at 5 p.m. Bye-bye.